United we're as strong as a mountain. United we're as deep as the sea.
This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and I'm talking with President of the General Industrial Workers of South Africa, Comrade Sebei. Welcome to Workweek.
Thank you, Comrade Steve, and thank you to the viewers of Workweek.
Why don't you give us an update? You've been on strike. It will be the 3-month anniversary on the 22nd of this month. You've been on strike for 3 months at Clover, the largest dairy company in South Africa that's been taken over by Milco and the central bottling company in Israel. What is the situation for your members and the struggle for a victory and for the defense of the working class in South Africa?
You know, the strike is taking toll on our members, but they have never been more determined than ever before. And I think that is because they understand the gravity of the situation and the fact that it is their jobs, is their livelihoods, is the factories where they work that they are fighting for. And therefore, it's about the future of not only their families, but also their towns and their communities. And I think as well, it's just an incredible amount of solidarity that they are receiving from local working class communities here in South Africa who have been extremely incredible just from the amount of support that they're giving, both in terms of boycott Clover campaign, but also donations for people just to make an ends meet. We have been distributing hampers, but also just the amount of international solidarity that comrades have been receiving from from comrades like yourself and many others in Workers International Network, my organization, International Socialist Alternative, and many others that have been mobilizing that international solidarity, including Palestinian solidarity movements. And I think that is what has been keeping them going, and therefore determination to fight and to continue.
The government of South Africa, through the courts, have tried to rule the strike illegal. What have the rulings been? And apparently they ruled that you could not have a boycott of Clover. Did they actually tell the union you couldn't have a boycott of Clover products?
It wasn't government. It was Clover that applied to court to try to get an interdict like that. So the first thing that they wanted was to declare the strike unlawful. When it's actually protected, they couldn't get that. They wanted to then have picketing suspended. They couldn't get that. They wanted a hashtag boycott Clover campaign to also be prohibited. They also couldn't get that. What they then ended up getting, which was frivolous to say the least, because ourselves and them were not in disagreement about violence and the need, therefore, to have a very non-violent, peaceful struggle, whatever that means, to both of us, because certainly there is a difference in terms of what you understand by non-violence. I mean, certainly for us, disruption is not is not violent. It's a disruption. And there is no industrial activity or there's no strike that is not disruptive by definition and by nature. But that said, we had issued the letter, which they got a court to order. We had already issued that letter long time ago condemning violence, not because Clover is telling us to do so, but because we do think that violence is counterproductive. We do think that it alienates a very crucial public, particularly working class and progressive, public support that we get in this country and across the world. And therefore, we think how we conduct the struggle is very important. But that's the only thing that really they got in court. And other than that, nothing much really. Boycott Clover is still not prohibited. The strike remains protected. Of course, they are going to try to exploit the latest unfortunate and quite regrettable incident that we must say that they deliberately provoked to try and get back to court to again seek an order to declare the strike unlawful. But obviously we'll oppose that.
Well, let's talk about that incident, because I know that the company, Milco and Central Bottling Company, have hired a private security force, which looks militarized. It looks like they have weapons. They're using rubber bullets on your members. What is the situation as far as these private security forces that are being used now on your members? Who are they and what are they doing?
The paramilitary, security companies that have been employed, which are more heavily armed than the state police, as I think you might have seen from the videos that we've been sharing. Our experience of them is that of a constant provocation and brutalization of our members. And I think even the latest incident, which I want to state unequivocally, as a workers' movement, we find a loss of a life of any worker quite regrettable and something that saddened us. I mean, I can tell you that I struggle to sleep over that, if I must say to you, and so on. Just the fact that a son, a father, a brother has lost a life due to a very cold, heartless calculation of Clover management to provoke a violent conflict between the workers and some members of these paramilitarized security forces, with the result of loss of life that, it was easy to predict, because let's understand it. This incident comes after a brutal attack of some of the leading shops that we have shared the videos of, that were attacked by thugs that were clearly hired by the company. And then secondly, I mean, when the company, without any lawful authority, stop the buses of the workers, and they come here and lie to people that workers were trying to force themselves into the factory. They know, and I can, provide correspondence on that. That shows that they knew that there were going to be buses that were going to fetch workers from that factory to the other factory, which is, very far away from that, from the factory where the violence took place and so on. Even in their own correspondence, they acknowledge that the workers were not getting into the factory, but actually were leaving the factory. They got the security guards to stop these workers, and what happened? Obviously, the workers didn't take that very kindly, and they started intimidating the workers. When then workers reacted, they started firing rubber bullets inside the buses where workers were going to, that were using to leave. Now, our members were injured in the course of that, and obviously, out of that, violence escalated. And I can imagine that the videos that we have seen circulating and going viral, happened in the context of that violent conflicts that were clearly and calculated provocation by the management of Clover. So that is what has been happening. But nonetheless, we ourselves remain committed to a campaign of a non-violent, disciplined ruling mass action. All of these acts of violence are acts of provocation by management, which from the beginning of the strike, right in November, they went to court even without any incidents to try and get the strike declared unlawful. So all of these, acts of provocation are calculated to achieve that end, because they are unable to break the spirit and determination of the workers. They are unable to break the solidarity we've been enjoying from communities and the workers' movement across the board. I mean, we have endorsements from all the main federations in this country. We have been supported by workers' activists from across the world. And I think that is what, that's the reason that they want to bring this struggle to an end by hook or crook, if they can't convince us otherwise.
This use of rubber bullets, apparently the government of South Africa, the ANC, has allowed these paramilitary forces to use this. The ANC government also approved their committee approved the purchase of Clover by Milco, by this Zionist company, the Central Bottling Company of Israel, the Wertheim family. And what we see, and maybe you can talk about it, the asset stripping that's going on at the company by Milco and the CBC. Are they trying to basically liquidate whole sections of the company and then allow imported product from Israel? Is that really what's going on?
Yes. I mean, let's just talk about violence. Remember that notwithstanding the fact that this government or the party, in government has been supporting the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, itself actually is guilty of the highest, killings of ordinary black working class people in this country per capita than what we are seeing in the US. So brutalization, particularly of the black working class, is a normality here. And therefore, what these companies are doing is what they are seeing the state doing. This is a government that has killed workers at Marikana in 2012 to protect and defend the profits of the multinational corporations in the mining industry, and we've seen similar incidences. But also, you are right, they've allowed operations of nothing short of paramilitary groups that are now hired by corporations to suppress a legitimate and genuine dissent by workers over their conditions of employment and oppression and the workplace and beyond. Now, the issue of asset stripping, yes, I mean, it is very obvious. If you look at the fact that the Milco, which is a CBC, Israeli-based owned CBC initiated a consortium, it took over the company in 2019. Within few months of that, we already have about 6 factories that are more or less closed as we are speaking at the moment. That shows the scale of industrial vandalism that is actually happening here. And I think thousands of workers having lost their jobs, and many more would have lost their jobs if it was not because of the stand that workers took. So we are seeing that industrial vandalism that is being committed precisely so that this biggest dairy manufacturer in the country is destroyed in order to open the space and the market for imported dairy products from Israel.
Internationalism, the issue of fighting these multinationals, it seems that the necessity of linking up with U.S. workers, with workers around the world is really critical because you're facing international capital. How do you see that being organized on a global level?
Let's start with the international basis of this strike itself. The issue of Palestine and our solidarity with the people of Palestine, we're not raising it as a side issue at the back of this conflict. In fact, we've made it very clear, and we've had concerted engagements, including, by the way, giving management of Clover a reasonable time to resolve the issue of the Israeli takeover, which we've stated unequivocally that we oppose, and will not just oppose through submissions to Competition Commission that we've made, submission to management of Clover that we made. We even had meetings with them to sit with them around to say, as the working class that suffered under, a brutal apartheid regime, which is not only similar, in many ways, the Israeli colonialism is much worse than what we actually encountered here. We cannot, with that experience, sit idle when the people of Palestine are being brutalized. We cannot allow ourselves to be associated, even if it's by silence and acquiescence, to take over of the biggest dairy manufacturer in this country, where our members are employed by a company that is linked with far right-wing Zionist parties in Israel that are implicated in organizing and establishing illegal Jewish settlements on occupied Palestinian territories that are under a brutal colonial Israeli imperialist occupation. Now, this has been the basis on which we've taken up the issue. And we have said that this strike is a campaign in solidarity with the people of Palestine. So from the beginning, for us, this has always been an international struggle. But also, you are right, the issues that are being posed here are issues that are international as well in character, beside and beyond the issue of Palestine. Because the issues of factory closures, the issues of job losses, but also degradation of work and conditions of employment of many workplaces is a universal phenomenon. And also the issues of takeovers. I mean, somebody was explaining that last year alone, $1.7 trillion was spent on similar takeovers. It's a tendency inherent in capitalism that in a period of crisis, you have an acceleration in a concentration of capital, where big multinational companies are taking over. The ones that are weaker, are weaker and weakened further by the crisis and so on. And that does not obviously create, does not increase the productive capacity. It doesn't create new jobs. It doesn't create new factories. In fact, it results in precisely what we are seeing in Clover, with factory closures, with destruction, if you like, both of value but also of labor itself, through massive layoffs and retrenchment that we are seeing. So these are issues that are, of course, of concern to American workers, to European workers, to Asian workers, because these are realities under capitalism in the period of the crisis. And anybody who thinks that you can manage capitalism in a period of a deep crisis like this, other than by means of a brutal austerity against the working class, that person is dreaming. That is utopia. So the only way forward is the workers' movement to unite, both locally but also internationally, in a campaign such as the one that we've tried to build in Clover, which has mobilized local communities and the labor movement across the spectrum of it behind Clover workers, but also has appealed to international solidarity in a much more active way that is not precedented since the collapse of apartheid here. We've received that active support from all international socialist movements as well as worker organizations that understand that the struggle at Clover is a struggle of international importance, is a struggle for workers all over the world in defeating the austerity measures that are being implemented. So I think what we are trying to do here is to lay a foundation, right, for active collaboration, active solidarity that goes beyond Congress resolutions and messages of support to each other, where we can have a coordinated struggle. That's the reason that even here in South Africa, right, we took workers of Clover to go and support the workers that are on strike at University of Pretoria, something that workers are less and less not used to. And we should be able to take the issues of the workers in Namibia in the same way that we are taking workers and the issues of the people of Palestine. But also we are inviting our comrades internationally to, not shy away to say, comrades of Clover, you have received support, you must return solidarity. Wherever there are struggles, we will be able and we will be willing to take up the struggle. For me, that is the only way forward, that is the only way to move forward. But of course, more than that, we need to create a mass workers' parties at national level, but also at international level, because it cannot be right, Steve, that we're just fighting so that tomorrow our children and the children of the children fight the same fight. We must overthrow this system, and the only way to do that is by organizing ourselves, not only in mass organizations like trade unions, both national and at the international level, but also into a mass political parties of the working class to organize, to unite the working class, and to overthrow the system of capitalism.
We're speaking with Comrade Sebei. He's the president of the General Industrial Workers Union of South Africa, and obviously also in the United States. There is no mass labor party. The union support the Democrats, the union leadership support the Democrats, and there is no real workers' party that represents the working class. But another aspect I wanted to talk to you about is apartheid in South Africa and Namibia, because under the apartheid regime, contract labor was a dominant feature. And now in not only South Africa, but Namibia, the Chinese National Nuclear Corporation has fired the leadership of the Wertheim mine, the uranium mine. Mine Workers Union of Namibia leadership has been fired. It seems like this fight against contract labor is a struggle in Southern Africa and globally, where workers are being prevented from forming unions and atomized, so they have no organizing power. How do you see the struggle in Namibia with the miners and the similarities, connections with the struggle in South Africa?
It is a vital struggle because, when the strike broke out, I, for one, appealed to our federation, SAFTU, to extend its support to the mine workers in Namibia, because the challenges that those workers are facing, obviously, is not only an issue of interest to us, because as we say here, an injury to one is an injury to all. And our race, the working race, knows no country, knows no color, and therefore, we owe it to those workers to give that support. But just even looking at the similarities of the issues, what we have seen here is, widespread takeover of mining assets, in particular by Chinese companies that have imported a very brutal forms of exploitation. And you see, what we, just in terms of labor broking that you've raised. Now, during apartheid, there was general precarity of employment, right? And therefore, the employers did not need labor broking in its current form. So one of the biggest struggles, against apartheid was precisely that, to end precarity of employment, where, according to legislations at the time, basically even taking a lunchbox to work was a reflection of optimism, really, because you could just be fired at any given point in time. But obviously, through workers' resistance and struggles against apartheid, workers became more and more secure. And what has happened post-1994 is that then the ANC opened a space where companies could use existing legal frameworks, including common law, to where, people could always have, employment agencies, seat contracts to each other, all of that, to allow new forms of precarity to employ. That has now been legally, if you like, abolished more or less in the legislation, but that legislation was left with so many loopholes, but more than that was interpreted by courts in such a way that labor broking continue, as if nothing happened at legislative level, which says that after 3 months of employment, the worker must be deemed permanent employee of the main company, net labor broking. And that's a similar struggle in Namibia. I know that there was a process to abolish labor broking, but I also think that nothing came of it because labor broking and precarious employment become a norm, not only in South Africa, not only in Namibia, but I think increasingly so across most of the world. One of the things in Clover is that they wanted to import a model of zero contracts that I know from the struggles of our comrades in the UK is unknown here, but they wanted to introduce it where a worker just doesn't have any specific amount of hours that is going to work per month. So you can see they are learning, and we should also be learning internationally as well from our own comrades, and how do you fight and how do we link with them up in common struggle.
The United States now has AFRICOM military bases all over Africa. They attack Libya, killing Gaddafi, but also releasing arms all over Africa. The destabilization by U.S. intervention is growing. And now the United States is threatening Russia and China with a military confrontation. It seems like the decline of U.S. imperialism now is leading the United States even to more adventurous potential world war situation. Where do you see imperialism militarily and the role of the United States now globally in Africa and in Ukraine and around the world?
Yes, in history, there is no empire that has ever considered, its position of world domination without a fight, right? And what we're seeing, which many people on the left thought is down to a maverick politics of Donald Trump, reflect a much more fundamental, problems of American imperialism. The fact that it has been losing ground to emerging powers such as China, but also Russia, in the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and all of that. The Middle East, and obviously, this increasing belligerence, is really the fight of a dying horse, and I think they recognize that, and that's the more, as you're correctly putting it, that they are going to be more adventurous, much more belligerent than we've seen them before, as they are trying to cling into a position that is no longer supported by their economic hegemony over the world economy in a way that it was before. If you look at, in Africa, for instance, they've lost their place as the biggest investor and trader here to China, which has just increased its investment and is trading. I know that most industries, particularly IT, the IT products like computers and all of that, we are importing about 85% of them from China, and you know, many industries and all of that. So, and you know, they've also placed a military base here in Botswana, which is next to South Africa. Now, Botswana on and by itself is a very rural agricultural economy, which I cannot see any significance from the strategic point of view of American imperialism. What it is clear is that they are lining up the US forces against the black working class in this country in an event of revolution, because it is very clear to them that the ANC will not be able to hold power forever. It is very clear to them that the ANC is losing ground. And I think they are lining that army you know, in Botswana to, you know, to be easy for them to be able to intervene in such a situation. And I think South African working class need to be aware of that, but also so are our American comrades, to say, how do we confront this imperialism and this military aggression that risk turmoil in the world, which will cost humanity enormously than actually in the previous war, given the fact that today most of these superpowers are armed with nuclear weapons, but also first and foremost that these imperialist armies are lined up against the working class. And I think that is a fact that we are not factoring significantly in our analysis, in our perspective, but also in our campaigning. You know, we don't have to allow US army in Botswana to start intervening in South Africa. There is no any other reason that they are there than to, you know, secure all the mines and big industries in the event of August Revolution here. And that's the issue that we must start highlighting. That's the issue that we must start campaigning against. And that is where we must start developing resistance.
And there is a strike going on of the assembly workers, Chinese assembly plant, FAW, in Port Elizabeth. These are workers who are have been on strike. They're fighting this company. Also, the ANC, what is the position of the ANC on U.S. military intervention in Africa? Have they said that U.S. bases should be out, all foreign bases, military bases should be out of Africa? What is their position? Is there silence? And what would the position of a Workers' Party be in South Africa?
ANC has not. In fact, they dismissed the leader of their youth league, who is now the leader of Economic Freedom Fighters, when he raised that question, to say, what is the U.S. doing building an army basis in Botswana, and why are we not raising it? For that reason, it was dismissed, right? It shows that ANC consider the U.S. presence in Botswana as very strategic to their interest, because I don't think they see ANC as a threat. I think the ANC today is no longer just an agent of imperialism, but very much part of it. I mean, you are talking about the party led by a billionaire president who is very much integrated into world monopolies that are dominating not only South African economies, but African, I think, and consequently linked to international capitalism. Therefore, it can only be that you know, they are completely aligned in terms of the interest in their interest. I know that they will be having some collaborations during the war on terror and so on. And in any event, U.S. imperialism is funding like HIV, you know, a program here. So there's complete alignment. If anything, the intervention of the U.S. Army in the circumstances would be to prop up, you know, South African government under ANC than in any other. So they are completely aligned. They have not complained, and I do think that they are welcoming them and so on. Now, of course, we've got to resist, as I've said, and I think this is the issue that we must raise, because this is, in my view, a deployment against South African working class first and foremost. I cannot see which other section of the working class, because for Zimbabwe or for Mozambique, it is much more convenient for them to rely on a South African defense force than for US imperialism to take that fight. And that is how they've actually been intervening. They've been supporting SNDF, South African National Defense Force, to intervening in regional conflicts. The only reason that you have the US Army basis is that in case South Africa itself falls and fall to the working class movement, they must be able to intervene. That is the reason for the army there, and that's the reason that the ANC is not only quiet, but actually, I think, very happy about it. If they had their way, they'll probably allow them to operate in South Africa. They just know that they will not be able to get away with that.
The WTO, when China entered the WTO, and it was able to send product to garments to South Africa. How did China's entry into the WTO affect the working class of South Africa? I know I've been to Cape Town, where you had a large garment industry which was wiped out. Factories were closed down. It seems like the protection of the South African working class was under the WTO, and the capitalist world structure has basically marginalized the working class and destroyed your own industries in South Africa.
The garment and clothing industry, I mean, you just have to see at the miserable situation of the union, which where the current minister of trade and industry, comes from. He was the general secretary, the current facilitator in the negotiations for Clover. He was also the general secretary of that union. The first general secretary of COSATU, Jane, is from that union. So it used to be a very powerful, union, which was one of the, cornerstone in the refoundation of an independent Black trade union movement, in particular, in the 80s. It's wiped out. What remains is a shadow of former self, and that reflects not just the weaknesses of the union, but the complete liquidation of the entire industry. It's not just in Cape Town. Here in Newcastle, you used to have major factories. When I was growing up, I think almost 2 out of every third clothes I was wearing will be made in South Africa. Today, I've never seen such a clothing or any garment that is made in this country anymore. That's how the situation is. So, and I think it's not just in a garment, in the clothing, in the textile industry. It's also, increasingly in the mining industry. A lot of the mines are now being taken over by China as well. The Sibanye gold and so on. So it's not just in Namibia where the mining industry is increasingly under Chinese. It's also in South Africa as well. And I think also other industries. There was a strike recently in South Africa, in Eastern Cape, in a Chinese-owned factory there. And I used to organize in the metal industry. I know that one of the biggest problems to all of these factories were workers used to be locked inside the factories for days without an end. Nobody would even know who is working in those factories, operating in complete secrecy under conditions of brutal exploitation. I know for a fact that that system was only challenged when years ago there was a fire in one of the factories, and it turned out that the employer was locking his employees in, and I think they died, many of them, in the fire, and I think there's been increased scrutiny, but that has not in any event, challenged the very foundations of a particularly brutal model of Chinese, imperialism and capitalism in this country.
The use of communication technology in your struggle, in the struggle of workers around the world, how has that been used by your members? I know that you're speaking to workers now in Europe, possibly in America, and in Latin America, Asia. Is that, you think, going to escalate the ability to have internationalism when you can have direct worker-to-worker contact with workers throughout the world?
Yes, I mean, that's the reason I think for me we have got to revisit the question of internationalism and not its principles. In fact, to say, how do we give it a new practical and concrete meaning in the context of all these advances that technology, and especially as accelerated by COVID and the need to adapt. Today, I mean, we have platforms where we can instantly communicate in mass as comrades from across the world in a way that until a few months ago, it was done by, leaders of the big multinational corporations that were meeting and could plan their corporations from all over the world using these mediums. Today, these mediums like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and all of that are now available to the working class, and that means we can be able to have a meeting, interactive meetings with comrades in Asia, US, Europe, Africa, Latin America, all of that. And I do think that for me, it means we can give a much more concrete, much more immediate, much more active expression to internationalism, working class and working class solidarity in a way that it wasn't always possible. It has always been possible, but I think today than ever before, these technological advances that accelerated in the past, 24 months in particular, means that a lot more is easier than ever before. I mean, we are able to meet in a way that we couldn't have about 24 months ago. And I think that to me is an opportunity, particularly for socialists, particularly for the workers and international movements. And I think we have to take a full advantage of that and exploit it to strengthen our fighting capacity, our solidarity and support of each other and internationalism.
So Workers of the World Unite has a very much more powerful meeting today with the use of this technology, bringing workers together on a global level and breaking the chains for workers' victory around the world.
Yes, Comrade Steve, because you see, that's the thing. I mean, in the past, I would be telling workers about Comrade Steve in the US who they never had or they will never have an opportunity of meeting him in person, right? Or at least until some years later, he's able to come to South Africa once in a lifetime. Now, today, when you say there's a meeting, I'm able to organize the workers of Clover to interact with you. They are able now to put a human face to solidarity and support they've been getting in the US. And that, give a whole new meaning to what it means to say workers of the world unite. That workers feel affinity with people that they know and people that they interact with than people who they just hear about their names and therefore, common struggles with them, common affinity with them is more abstract than is concrete, than is immediate in a much more interactive environment of this kind of interviews, this, Zoom meetings, and all the platforms that have been unleashed by this. So for me, it means that we can be able to humanize, to personalize that interaction in a way that we have not done before. And that for me is exciting. That for me presents us with enormous possibilities in giving a real meaning that we belong to one race, and that is a working race to which as working class people, black, white, African, Americans, and all of that, belong to. And our struggles are common. Our experiences are more or less common. And of course, we need to be able to unite. We need to be able to organize. We need to be able to support each other's struggles.
I want to thank you for joining us on Work Week. I think the struggle of the American working class and the miners have been out over 10 months. The Warrior Met miners owned by BlackRock, an $8 trillion hedge fund. I mean, workers worldwide face a similar struggle, similar fights, similar conditions, and same bosses all over the world. So obviously, we have to unite one world working class if we're going to be able to confront the attacks that we're facing. So I hope that American workers will join Clover workers and workers around the world will unite together to make sure that your struggle is successful and that you not only get your jobs back, but you take over the plants and you build an industry for the working class of South Africa and Southern Africa as well.
Thank you very much, Dave. And we so hope, and I think with your support and support of many other comrades across the world, we are going to achieve that.
Thank you very much. Solidarity.
Mandla.